definitely touch on all that. Yeah. Have you heard about the new book? This guy, he wrote like the Cowboys of Compton or something like that.
I heard about it. I haven't picked it up. I think I saw it somewhere and was about to buy it, but I'm one of those people that, I have a book that I need to finish, or, like 40, 50 books that I need to finish. And I'm like, ooh, but this is a new book.
Yeah,
I've not touched this one yet. And I see a shiny cover and I get attracted by a good cover, or I get sucked in by a good name. Like the name of the book. Like if it's a tight name, I'm like for example, I picked up this book called Asexual Erotics. And I was like, I'm fascinated. You got me. I want to know how that works. I bought it for didn't even read the description when I bought it. I read it right after, but I was like, yo, I have to get it. I need to know.
Well, that makes for a powerful bookshelf. All right. Okay, so we are live. We're joined this hour by Dr. Javon Johnson, who is a slam champion, who is an author, who is an editor, who is a professor, who has accomplished many things and holds many a title. Really, really thrilled to have him here for this hour. This is part of the DAW series, speaker series, part of our signature series. The DAW Center for the Arts is a nonprofit based in Pomona, California. We are an art gallery as well as an art lab. We seek to serve the community of Pomona as well as surrounding communities. And since the world is now on the internet, we now seek to serve the world. So we are really excited to have you, Javon. Let's start this story in the beginning, though, because a lot of people know of your successes in slam. A lot of people know you went on to get your doctorate. A lot of people know you went on to do a lot of really great things in the academy. But what not a lot of people know, or what not a lot of people that I don't know, is that you actually have a long success in speech and debate.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
So I'm going to give you the long story, but I'm going to do it as quick as I possibly can. So the long story is this. I was in high school at Crenshaw High School. And I was, I used to take summer classes early so that I could finish. By all metrics, I could have actually left high school by the 11th grade. But I stayed my senior year was dope. These were my senior year courses. I had choir, drama, library duty, art, and Spanish. Those are my classes. I had no quote unquote core subject because they were all done. Like my histories, my Englishes, my maths, my sciences, they were done, right? And so I used to just chill my senior year. It was the best senior year ever, right? But I say all of that to say this, right? My sophomore year going into my junior year, I took a history class that was supposed to be for my junior year, right? I took a step up history class, and the teacher there, Florence Avignon, who I still am in awe of to this day, who is largely responsible for a great deal of my trajectory in so many ways, right? And Mrs. Avignon taught speech and debate as well, right? And we were doing mock trials, Plessy v. Ferguson, in the last predominantly Black school in Los Angeles at that time, right? I had the unfortunate duty of representing the white guy in a Black school, and the non-Black people were brown. So you could imagine how that was gonna go, right? Like, it was like, you're gonna lose. You're just not gonna win. Which I think is brilliant, right? Because it allows Black people to reimagine histories, reimagine futures, what happens if we're in control, have power, if we can manipulate structures, the way in which whiteness, whatever, right? That's my thinking later. In the moment, I represented him and I lost unanimously, of course. But the teacher was like, she was like, yo, you actually made some smart points. She was like, under no circumstance, you knew you were gonna lose, right? I was like, yeah. She goes, but you made some really good points and I like your poise up there. Have you ever thought about speech and debate? Now, what's important about this is I'm a high school kid. I would eventually go on to be homecoming king, most voted, most talented. I was a popular dude. I was voted senior flirt, right? Like I was a popular guy in high school, right? Yeah. And I say all of that to say, not the most popular guy, but I had some popularity there, right? And so I was very concerned with my image And I was like, yeah, I'm definitely joining the speech and debate team. Absolutely. I'll see you next year. I'm like, this woman is insane if she thinks I'm going to go hang out with those nerds. Like she's lost her mind. Long story short, next semester, fall semester, I'm in my math class. In comes Mrs. Javon. She goes, Javon, I noticed your name is not on the roster. I was like, oh, she was like, will I see your name on the roster tomorrow? Pull me out of class and everything. I was like, yeah. I'm telling her, yeah, like, leave me alone, lady, right? She comes the next time I'm in class, Javon, your name is still not on the roster. The third time she came to the class, she was like, I'm not going to stop coming until you at least try. You do understand this, right? And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. She goes, all I ask is that you give it a shot. If you hate it, that's your right. If you give it your 100% effort, I'll give you an A. But just give it a legitimate, earnest shot. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I did it. Went to my first tournament, took second, and got bit by the bug, as they say, right? I caught it. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And so I did speech and debate in high school, and I won. I lost. I was in novice my whole first year, but when I finally got up to like varsity high school level, I started killing it. In my senior year, I was just winning everything imaginable, right? Like it was like Jesus, right? And I was that arrogant a-hole because we were competing against mostly white kids that they wouldn't announce that. How they used to announce it, they would just call people from out of their seats, right? So you don't know if you lost or won by the time they go from finalist, third, second, and you're champion. You don't know if you lost or won at this point. And I used to walk halfway there before they called my name because it's like, I know. And people used to hate it, right? Yeah. Now, you knew me as a 20-something-year-old guy, and I was super arrogant. You could imagine 15-year-old Javon, right? Like, it's like, yeah, you know I'm the man. Yeah. Long story short, I got bit by the bug, and I kept doing it. I eventually became, was I president or I was either vice president or president of that team. I can't remember which, but I was actively involved. Then I went to college, and I ended up going to El Camino College after some failed stints at some other spaces, right? For various reasons. Tried Santa Monica College. The commute was too far. My then girlfriend who was going there broke up with me and started dating a guy that we was hanging with. I was like, yo, how that works. But I was like, I got,
it's not big enough. I mean, it's a big campus, but it's not big enough.
Yeah, like, why are we doing this? Like, there's other people. But like, I had to get out of that mess. But I ended up going to El Camino, and they had a team. And I competed for that team. And my first year, I was horrendous. Like, I lost. So I went from winning everything to losing everything. And I was losing in novice the whole first year because I went back to novice for college competition.
Well, okay, I want you to continue your story, but what was so different about college versus the high school?
I still don't know to this day. I don't know, right? So what ends up happening is my last tournament, my second to last tournament, I won novice. And my coach was like, I think you figured it out. Are you ready to go up to the next level? And I was like, yeah. And I went to like intermediate, and I won that one. And that was with my last two tournaments. So my following year, she was like, you want to do varsity? I was like, yeah. Literally just start killing varsity, winning everything in varsity, to the point that I went from my first year to not winning anything to being the top rated community college competitor in the nation.
Do you know what you changed or shifted up, or is it just still a mystery?
Part of me thinks it was confidence. That's probably the only thing I could really point to. Like, once I felt confident about it, it was a wrap. Like, it's not much you could tell me.
Do you think you lacked confidence because you were entering to a different group of competition, or because you were going out of breakup?
No, it wasn't even that, because by the time I got to El Camino, the breakup was a done deal. I just think I don't trust people. You know what I mean? Like, that's a big thing about me, right? Like, I don't trust you, but if I trust you, I trust you. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. I go from none to everything. There's not a whole lot of space in between. And I think I just didn't trust those coaches. I didn't trust my teammates. I didn't really talk to them. I didn't like them. It was me being around mostly white people for the first time in my life, just like a lot of white people and me.
El Camino?
Yeah, the team was white.
Okay.
The team was largely white. I think we had one other black competitor, but he was by all intents, he was raised around white folks. And so he got along with them significantly better than I did. You know, they used to say wild shit. And I used to be like, I checked people on it, and that made it uncomfortable for some of them to be around me. Long story short, I ended up stretching some of them to think about race in ways they haven't before. And some of them are still my good friends to this day. Yeah. But early on, I just didn't care to really be around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, you know, it was like, it's like early Michael Jordan, since that documentary is out, when he's like, I'm not doing this, I'm not going to be around y'all like that, right? It's like, yeah. And so I end up winning my second year. I ended up winning 3 gold medals, a silver, and what they call the Bavaro Tabor Award, which is awarded to the top ranked community college competitor in the country. Transferred over to Cal State LA, won a bunch of awards there, including the national championship, including All-American, including a number of other things. And so I was just a really good competitor. And what I think was different about me is that there's generally 3 types of events. You have debates, you have what we call limited preps, I should say 4, platform speaking, and then you had interp. I literally won at all of them. And so that the range, because there's so different events, that the range was like, for some people, like, what the hell?
So you said limited preps. When was the last one you said?
And interpretation events.
Interpretation, okay. I think that the other 2 are kind of self-evident, but can you tell us a little bit about limited preps?
Limited preps is like extemporaneous speaking or impromptu speaking. So like, you got to think like, so essentially like impromptu speaking would be like, they would give you a saying and you have 2 minutes to prep a 5-minute speech. Now, there's a way you could coach. You get trained to learn how to do this, right? Yeah. But it teaches you how to do. So like, one of the things you do is you have a witty anecdote that leads you into your point, and then you give them 3 points that proves your witty anecdote argument, your point true, and then you wrap it all up. Once you learn how to do that, so if you said, you know, the quote is, the sky is blue, right? That would be the quote. And I can go, and I'm going to make this up off the top of my head, right? But it like, jazz artist John Coltrane once quipped that he is so blue that da 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 da, and people smile. Yeah. Like, what that tells us is that there's always multiple meanings to blue. Here today, I want to think about multiple meanings of blue, and I want to do so in 3 forms. I want to think about 1, the story about blah 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 blah. 2, I want to look up at this New York Times article that I read 2 weeks ago about how blue is not the actual color of the sky, but da 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 da. And 3, I want to da da da, and finally I'll tie it all back together and see how this. It's literally that, right? Yeah. You learn how to do that. So you store a bunch of meaningless stories in your head to do this. And then the other is extemp. Extemp I didn't do. Extemporaneously speaking, I forget the exact time limit, but you have more time to develop a more serious speech. But it was like, you might have 15 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. And interpretation.
Interpretation is similar to like a reader's theater, if you're familiar, like acting. It's literature, and you perform without costume, and you have the script in your hand. It's like that kind of event.
So okay, I want to move on to talk about your time in slam, and that's actually how we did meet when we were both in our 20s.
Right.
You mentioned earlier Michael Jordan, but it's interesting that the basketball player that you harken back to in my mind at that time is actually Larry Bird, because I remember you walking into the slam and saying, "All right, who's taking second?" I literally remember you saying that. So
that is definitely a me thing. That is definitely a thing I would say.
And you've forgotten it because you probably done it.
I've said so much ridiculous. Like, in competition, we're competing, right? Like, and for me, you know, I say ridiculous things. I try to do so in a way that doesn't attack people.
Yeah.
Right. So my logic here is I get to say anything within the bounds of competition.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, if that bothers you, then that says more about your will to push past it than it does me, right? And the big thing about this is I grew up playing 80s and football in the 80s and 90s, and basketball for that matter. And we had hard, tough coaches.
Yeah.
And so I still think of competition in those modalities, right? Like if I could get you off your game by saying something ridiculous, that's your issue to deal with.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So the poems could be serious, but the slam itself is a game.
Right. And you threw off your jacket as you said it.
Huh?
You threw off your jacket as you said it too. So the whole thing. It was a complete like mind-body experience.
Hilarious. No, I've said all kind of wild stuff, and people remind me, and I just start chuckling like I don't know what. I just say wild things like second place is up for grabs. Who won it? But this one is gone. I hope y'all know that. So I said all kind of wild stuff. But I mean, look, the thing about me is, and I grew up idolizing players like, I hated Michael Jordan because I was such a LA Lakers fan. I hate Bird too. And I didn't even really see Bird play like that because I was so young when he was playing. But anybody in Celtic green, I don't like you. I don't care. It just doesn't matter. For example, Paul Pierce went to high school with my brother and my cousin. I knew that man since he was in high school. The moment he went to the Clippers, it was you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't care. You know? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. And my family used to run a league called the Say No Classics, where all these college players from around the country, particularly if you played in LA in high school or play in LA in college, would play. So Paul Pierce even played in that league. I saw him come back to the league after his rookie season. He was like, "What up, Jay?" I was like, he was like, "For real?" I was like, "Nah, fam, I don't like you." I don't. So, but I will say this: despite my dislike for Bird, my dislike for Jordan, and you know the moments they beat my Lakers and took chips from them, I love their fiery spirit. Right? For all the issues Kobe has, I love a competitor spirit. I love relentlessness. Like I'm enthralled by relentlessness, right? Like Dennis Rodman is one of my favorite players because I have never seen him give up on a rebound or a loose ball. Just that kind of hunger for something is amazing to me, that people can do that they can just go after something in this sort of almost myopic kind of way. And what does that say about greatness? Does it take that kind of myopia? Does it take that kind of just ridiculous, relentless, focused drive that doesn't even care about hurting people's feelings outside of them?
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm interested in that. I love Westbrook. Love watching him play. It's bonkers to see how that man he attacks 100% of the time. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is incredible. Right. So my favorite players are those kind of dogmatic, relentless, just no quit. Just I will fight you until I have no fight left. And that literally means I'm dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I say all of that. No. But I say all of that to say, so my energy for competition is rooted in that, right? And so even as a slam competitor, I do things like that. Like I remember, Kobe saying something to the tune of, and I think Michael Jordan says something similar, which is, I don't want to just beat you. I want you to question why you ever competed against me in the first place.
Yeah.
And so when I slammed, I used to think the same thing. I used to be like, what's up? I want you to go, and this happened in speech and debate too. So in speech and debate, they roll out the list of who you're competing against, sometimes 10 minutes before you're competing against them. Yeah. Right? 20 minutes before, 30 minutes before, like that kind of thing, right? Yeah. My favorite feeling is when somebody realized they were competing against me round one, Saturday at 9 a.m. And they go, fuck. And I'm like, yep, you lost already.
Yeah.
Lost. Yeah. Or in slam, when I show up to a slam, people are like, you competing? That lets me know you shook. I got you.
Yeah.
Right. And those are some of my favorite. I'm like, it's good. It's
Yeah,
good.
you're not gonna find a judgmental audience in me. So I mean, like, I'm just there anyway. Yeah. Like,
Funny.
so okay. So let's talk about your successes in slam because you actually you broke some records, right? I mean, like in terms of the time elapsed between the winning and the amount of times you're on final stage, and
Yeah.
there's some records that have your name next to them. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so I have competed in 11 competitions, made 8 finals. Feel like I probably should have made 2 more, but that's another story. That's neither here nor there. I won 3 times. I think I can't remember if I was the first to go back to back, but I was definitely one of the first. And I think I was the first to hit the final stage 3 times in a row. Mm-hmm. There are other people who've accomplished those feats since, but I want to believe I was the first. And the reason I want to, because at that time, Taylor Molly was the oral historian. And Taylor was like, I'm pretty certain you are the first to do those things.
Yeah.
And so I've never really looked into it, but the other thing too is my first title was 03. My last one was 2017. I took time off, came back. And so that's a long stretch, right? I was slamming against some people who were toddlers when I first won.
Yeah, yeah.
Who were in kindergarten when I first won or something like this, right?
But when you started, you were also slamming against people who were like 40 years old or something like that. You were like,
yeah. So I think people forget slam sort of gradually became a young person's game, right? Like, because when I first started out, there was a lot of older people around. I mean, there was definitely younger folks there too, but it was a lot more older people competing than there are seemingly now. And so there was just this long range of when I won, and partly what made me come back was in 2016, Rudy, my brother from another mother, one of my closest friends in the world, he took 4 rookies to the final stage and took second to Baltimore. And he was hurt that they lost, and I could see it because he put in work with that team. And if I'm being honest, and I told Rudy, I even told Baltimore this, I was like, I after Rudy, he had his head down. I was like, you good, fam. You did a good job this year. And I was like, yo, I'll come back next year and we'll win it. He was like, word? And I was like, yeah, facts. And that's like exactly what happened. I came back next year, we won. And what it felt like was that my little brother and his friends and my little sisters and stuff were getting pushed around by some big kids. Even though Baltimore wasn't, all of them aren't older, I just didn't like it. So I was like, I will tool up. We'll come back. We'll retool. We'll come back. And so that's how I ended up coming back for that 1 year.
Yeah, yeah. So, a lot of this, a lot of the purpose of gathering these things for oral history is to be viewed by a wide array of people with wide arrays of varying interests, right? So can you tell our audience a little bit about Rudy Francisco and some of the things that he's done?
Yeah, Rudy's GOAT material, GOAT status. Rudy has won an underground National Poetry Slam champion individual. That's an individual tournament. He's won individual World Poetry Slam. He's won the National Poetry Slam champion. Rudy has probably more views than most poets I can think of on YouTube. He has a ridiculously high-selling book in Helium. He's an international touring poet. He appeared on Jimmy Fallon. Like, that's huge, right? Twice as a poet. He was a part of a collective with me called Fiveology, in which we toured and opened up for Jill Scott over one summer. And that was an incredible experience, along with Andrew Tyree, Prentice Powell, and Sean William. He co-founded the San Diego Poetry Slam, runs that venue, and now he owns the rights to the individual Poetry Slam and puts that on. Now that PSI has sort of effectively become defunct.
Yeah.
So he's a huge person. His name rings large. He is one of the few celebrity poets we have that he is recognized almost everywhere we go. Yeah, and I'm proud of him. It's my brother.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm super proud of him. Yeah, he's dope.
Yeah. No, but I remember the time period when Rudy was kind of making his name, so to speak. We're talking about like around the 2008 to 2010 time period, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he was known in the way that regional and even national poets are known, right? Known throughout the community, but not known at like a transcendent level like that you're describing now. And I remember in that time that you were one of the big role models that he would talk about, like and that was a so I mean that brotherly relationship is definitely something from an outsider I could see it.
Right. No, and what's crazy is he tell people, I mentored him a lot. And I'm like, he has no idea how much he's taught me. Like he actually taught me a lot too. Like he's incredible at certain things that he does. And I steal bits and pieces of it. I'm like, I'm gonna try to do that. But then he also shows me things. We edit each other's work. And we have a really, really, I think, really deep, profound, intimate relationship in ways that most straight men aren't able to have with straight men. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I love him for that too. Beyond the poetry stuff, that's my brother, right? That's my guy. You know what I mean? Like he does a thing. When he first put on the individual poetry slam, I was there and he was just sitting back and I could see he marveled. And I just put my arm around him and sat next to him. Was like, I'm proud of you, man. You're doing it. Right? Like that's my guy. That's my guy. I remember seeing him. It had to be '06. The summer of '06 is when I first saw him perform. And he was just kind of opening up for me and Ant Black. And I turned to Ant, because that was also the first time I met him. And that verbatim said, oh, this motherfucker can be good. He can be really good. That was that's the first time I saw him. I saw something. I was like, he has something.
Yeah, definitely. No, Rudy's great, and I'm gonna try and interview Rudy too. I'm gonna reach out to him, but this is about Rudy. This is about you. So let's talk about the fact. Let's talk about your television appearances, because like almost every way between let's say like 2000 and to today that a poet could end up on television, you did, right? Let's start running down the line. HBO Deaf Poetry. Tell us what it was like.
So that was crazy, right? Because that was like the first thing TV. It wasn't the first thing I did TV, but because I actually did this thing, ABC was covering like LA poets. LA artists. And I was the poet they chose. And it was like this snippet that it aired quickly. They didn't tell me. I was like, how did y'all not tell me this? Whatever, right? And they followed me around for like a whole day to see the day in the life of a poet, right? Like literally followed me to a hood spot to go get a hamburger. Like they followed me everywhere. It was great. And this was also the time that, I think reality TV is beginning to get its rise, thanks in part to, the economic decline and wanting cheaper television, be able to produce cheaper television in part. But I say all of this is to say like, so HBO was the second, but it felt like the first major thing, right? And I remember doing HBO. I think HBO. No. Yeah, HBO was the first. And for me, and I remember doing it and I was like, yo, this is kind of big. They flew me out. Like somebody flew me out. You know what I mean? Then there was a guy who picked me up in a limo. That was crazy. He had my itinerary, kept calling me Mr. Johnson. I was all of like 22, 21 maybe.
Yeah.
It's like, Mr. Johnson, are you good? I'm like, yeah. And then you go in this room and I see a bunch of poets that I've known around the country. We japping, we talking. It's celebrities like right there. And we're all the same people for the most part, except for a handful of celebrities who like felt like they were better. But for the most part, we were all the same people. And I just remember looking around the room at people I listened to, people I watch, and was like, holy hell, I'm here. I recorded with Kanye West a week before College Dropout dropped.
Wow.
And I had a very interesting moment. That's when he did the 18 years verse, but it was cool. It was a really, really great experience. I remember I was sitting to Kanye West was on my left, Rachel McKibbins was on my right. It was just hanging out. I was like, yeah. What is my life? So it was good. It was a really dope experience, and got to meet Russell. I already met Stan and Russell prior to, but really got to talk to Stan and stuff a little more that trip. And it was a really, really good time, a good experience to see also how TV functions when it's like hella, because they were efficient. Like that was the thing. Like I've never seen a machine of TV like that before. They were like, they'd sit you down before each show. They sit the poets down and the artists, and they're like, if you mess up, stop, go back a couple of lines, keep going. The magic of editing will fix it. Do not start over the poem. Do not do this. You'll exit. Mos Def will come out, blah, 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 da, da, da. He'll stop. He'll introduce you again. Go back out. Record your second poem again. And you're like, Jesus. And it was just like that. Because they were recording like 2 shows and 3 shows a day, if I remember correctly. Shion can tell you better than that. But they were recording multiple shows. They were knocking that shit out. Yeah. It was incredible to watch.
Yeah. Versus and Flow.
Versus and Flow was dope. They saw me at a live show, and ended up asking me to come out. And the first season was in Atlanta. And by that point, I had done a few TV things, so I felt like I'm in my zone. I got this. I've been here before, right? Right. So I felt more like a veteran. And the beautiful thing about Versus and Flow is that was the first time of them doing anything like that. So they were kind of learning on the fly, which is why if you look at season 1, it looks so very different from season 2 and so forth and so on. And it was a really dope experience to record, to be be there with them, to watch them learn. And then before the second season came up, they hired me as a consultant, and I got to work behind the scenes too. And so that was dope to see how they pick poets, to be involved in the picking of poets and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I was going to ask you, so as a consultant, you were actually part of the selection, the curation of poets?
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, like I gave them a ton of poets and names and videos. I had to wade through some videos that came through via submission. I was like, to wade through them. I got like the stack of stuff that I had to watch and wade through them. And then we met and we discussed who we liked. And we had an A board, a B board, and a C board. And it was like it was a little board, right? Like to see the behind the screens of how TV functions I think it changes it utterly changes how I watch TV.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm not going to ask you who was on A, B, and C because I don't want to.
I still remember some boards too.
I don't want.
And a part of me is mad that I didn't screenshot it.
No. That's interesting. Next time there is a poet show and you find yourself in that position, remember your boy though. But no.
By the way, you were a C poet. I'm like, oh my
God. I remember actually, I met the producers. I got so fucking drunk. I mean, I've been sober now for 7 years, but that's one of my biggest memories is Paul putting himself on the line for me and me getting fucking wasted. Anyhow, that's a different story for a different time. Okay, Arsenio Hall.
Arsenio Hall was cool. That was not partially, it was mostly a 100% Versus and Flow. The people who did Versus and Flow. So Walton Isaacson had that connection. They were actually managing us and helping us direct us and doing all that stuff. That's also how we got the tour with Jill Scott. And so part of how they were putting us out there was to do this, right? And again, you see the machinations of celebrity and how celebrity works and how that functions, right? Like they put us in a place to be on TV. So our faces are out there. They put us in a place to tour with Jill Scott. So our faces are out there. So we're constantly performing, going around the country, building a name. They put us at the we did the New Orleans Jazz Fest, right? Right, and performed for like McDonald's 365 Live, and that was also on BET. And our faces were just constantly out there, and our names are so like you can see how people can create celebrity, right? Not to say that there's no talent to go in there, but there's also people working behind that talent.
Yeah, it's momentum and people working.
But the Arsenio Hall show was dope. Arsenio was cool. It was just a good time with the fellas. To be able to do that with those guys was incredible.
I want to ask you about Jill Scott, but I want to run through this. The United Shades of America.
That was Donnie Jackson. So they were doing this, and Doc hit me up. Donnie Jackson is a poet, writer who based out of DPL like myself, and he found DPL via his show Black White that was on FX. And he just stuck around ever since. And me and Donnie became real cool. Like that's one of also my closest friends. That's somebody who I can call and cry to, right? And have deep conversations about like what, you know, life and things. And he was like, you were doing the show in Chicago and the violence. He was like, I know you did the edited book, The End of Chirac. Do you want to come? And blah, blah. I was like, sure. Or I was doing the edited book, The End of Chirac at that point. Yeah. And I was like, absolutely. Sure. Got to have a really dope conversation. Kamal Bell is really smart, really funny. And there was a snippet. I think our interview probably aired maybe about a max of like 2 minutes on that show. Yeah. We probably talked for about an hour.
Yeah.
And it was a really good conversation.
That's wild. Like it's boiled down 2 minutes like that. That's
yeah.
Here's the question I have for you. Were you happy? Okay, so but you know what I mean. But like I had an interview with the Associated Press when Andy Ruiz won the heavyweight championship. I was for about an hour and a half, and then what they had me say was 2 lines, which was like they didn't believe in Andy just like they don't believe in us, right? Now I understand that's very anthemic, right? But that I went through the history of like, you know, Chavez won the championship this year, this one, you know, like, and then it was like they didn't believe in Andy, just like they don't believe in us. They don't give us a chance. Like, and so I was like, oh God. So were you happy with your 2 minutes that they selected for the conversation?
So I was. I think they did a really good job.
I'm happy for you.
I have been interviewed in other places that I was like, what? What? Like, first off, why pick that when there was so much better stuff? And then I've been interviewed once where they took me so out of context. I was like, I didn't even say that. That's not what I was saying. Yeah. It'd be like if I was like, you know, if I get a disease and I spread it, then I will kill everybody. And they chop it out and be like, Javon Johnson said, I will kill everybody. Oh my God. Like, that's not what I said. Like, it was like that bad. And I was like, I didn't say. So I ended up having to call the newspaper.
Well, who did this?
I can't remember. This was a while ago, but I called and I made them retract. I threatened lawsuit. I was like, I also recorded it. So we could talk about it. And they retracted it and took the story out. And luckily it was a digital story. So it wasn't in print. But
right.
What the hell, man, I didn't say that. So I've learned to record my interviews. I've learned to also talk in a way that makes it difficult to pull out those snippets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not so much right now. But in other interviews, I'm very cognizant of what it is that I say and how it is that I say it.
Yeah, the video's live, and I'm not gonna chop it up. So I mean, right. Like what I say is what I say. What you say, what you say. Right? Anything we say is what we said. Well, Jill Scott, what was that like?
Jill was incredible. So we didn't even see Jill that often, right? I'm gonna tell you, true story. This was one of the last legs of the tour. She comes in, she goes, hey, can I come and talk to y'all while we're getting dressed? And we're like, yeah. Who? Like, did you think we were gonna say no? Like, yes, come in. And so she's talking, she's like, you all have been incredible. You've been amazing. It's been so great to watch 5 sexy men. And don't get me wrong, I mean sexy men. And I was like, well, say less, Jill, you know? Yeah. And she was like, I heard y'all are doing Essence Fest, not Jazz Fest, Essence Fest. And she was like, I heard y'all doing Essence Fest. It's a great show. Can I give y'all a bit of advice? And we're like, yeah. She was like, when you're on your stage, grab your nuts. And I was like, what? And she was like, crap. She was like, this has been a great talk. And left, and we were like, what?
I'm not at all surprised.
But no, she was incredible. She was amazing. She was dope. And the experience was good, right? Like that kind of brotherhood and camaraderie. We were on the road for about 2.5, 3 weeks or something like that. And we were just really hanging with each other. Like Rudy and I were talking about it the other day. It was the funnest experience I've ever had in my entire life. And it's not even close performing.
Yeah.
It's not close. Like, we loved each other through jokes. We laughed at each other. And Rudy and I were talking about it. There are days in my life, about once a week, I sit there and chuckle about something that happened on that tour.
Yeah.
Like, there was just so much, right? From Prentice wanting to wear shorts one day, and we're like, nah. And us laughing at him about that, to people's outfits. Whenever somebody wore, like, we didn't tell people to change outfits. We just talked bad about your outfit till you changed it. Like one of my favorite ones is Rudy. Rudy has this jacket. He's never worn it again. It was like a khaki color, like 3/4 length long coat, and it had straps. It had like 6 straps going across. And I was like, all right, Ranger Roo, what fucking safari are you going on? And everybody was like, God. And he was like, is that bad? He took the thing. He's never won.
Oh, yeah, Buckaroo Francisco.
Yeah, like Andrew had this shirt with like this like weird logo patch on it. And I was like, so when's Scotty beaming you up? Or he was like, yo. And everybody was like, that sweater is awful. Take that off. Like, and we laughed at each other, and we laughed with each other, and we helped each other through difficult moments. You know, some of the more tougher and memorable moments I think of. So before I get beautiful moment, Rudy's an Indiana Pacers fan. Grew up a Pacers fan his whole life. And when we were in Indianapolis, we performed in Conseco Fieldhouse. So he got up there. We're on the stage, which is literally on the court of all his faves, and he like tears up. And all of us just come and hug him. He was like, we're here. And it was just this beautiful, beautiful moment. Or that was the year we found out Zimmerman would be acquitted for the cold-blooded murder of Trayvon Martin. And we had spent so much time with each other in camaraderie, 5 Black men. That was the one night no one hung with each other. And I still have yet to make sense of that. I still have yet to write a piece about that. That we all went our 5 separate ways that night. We came off the stage, what was probably, it was in Chicago, what was probably our best performance by far. And we all, it's our text messages, we saw our phones, and we all went, fuck. And we were staying, 3 blocks from the performance venue, which felt like the longest car ride home. And we was like, all right. And everybody just went to the room, and everybody went to their rooms and did their own thing. And we didn't see each other until the next morning.
Yeah.
I know I went out, I was just walking the street. And if I'm being honest, and I've admitted this to a handful of people, I wanted a white person to try me that day. I wanted it desperately. I wanted a bad look. I wanted someone to look too long at me. I wanted a reason. And thank God I didn't get a reason. But I wanted one so bad in that moment. And I didn't want anyone around me who was going to try to talk sense into me. For me in that moment, it's like, what is the fuck in being sensible in a non-sensible world? What's the point of that? Right? In that moment, that was all I wanted. Like everything in me was like, if somebody looks at me too long, it's going to be a problem. So it was an amazing experience that utterly changed my life. That whole 2.5 weeks.
Yeah. Well, there's no smooth transition out of that. So let's just
let's
talk about your academic career. So like starts at El Camino, you go to Cal State LA. Before we began this, I want just a little segue. We talked about people's impressions of Los Angeles that are not necessarily accurate. Can you tell us a little bit that?
So I travel a lot, as I know you do as well, and you just get both. You get so, oh, you're from LA, yeah, like I hate LA, and I'm like, oh, okay. You wear those shoes, I hate those shoes. Like, are we just, like, how are we gonna have this conversation? Like, I hate your haircut. Like, do you think, are we gonna keep going here, or are we gonna stop here? Like, that's such a weird thing, right? To say, oh, this is where I live. Oh, I hate that house. Christ, man, where's the tact? But it's socially acceptable. In fact, it's popular, I think, to say I don't like LA, right?
Yeah.
Because it's fake, because it's all Hollywood, because it's all this, whatever, right? Which is stupid. You know, I always tell people all cities are social constructions.
Yeah.
New York is as fake as Vegas is. You think the skyscraper just naturally erected? That's the dumbest thing. It was wrong. Like, you think it just grew like an Empire State Building? Like, it was made the same way can water lakes in Vegas are made. Like, they don't belong. A lake does not belong here, but someone put it here. A skyscraper does not belong in Chicago, but someone put it there. So all cities are constructions, right? But some cities are designated somehow especially constructed, right? Somehow, even us. And LA has that attachment because of Hollywood, because of Tinseltown. It's a town of stories, but I think it's also something about westward, right? What happens when we move westward and how people move west to forget their past, to remake themselves, to redo themselves and their own images. And I think that also has something to do with it, right? But then there's transplants who also perform LA, that I think that's who most people are referring to when they say I hate people from LA. Yeah. Also, when people do come to LA, they spend their entire time in Hollywood and on the beach and be like, oh, I hate LA. I was like, okay, you didn't go to LA, but that's, you know what I mean? That would be like me taking a flight to San Francisco, spending my entire time in, I don't know, Castro Valley and being like, I hated San Francisco. I was like, well, first off, you weren't in San Francisco, you weirdo. Like, that's number one. But I think also too, I've heard that from a lot of people who've never been to LA. And I'm like, that's weird.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's set up for people to say that long before they ever come. And to say otherwise is to have a non-popular opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think
I'm always telling people LA is at capacity. Stay home if you hate it. Just go back to wherever you're from. It's just, we're at capacity. Sign management, you know?
Well, I think it's got this kind of La La Land idea of it, where it's like a lot of like pretty people who aren't that smart with ulterior motives or something like that.
Well, right. And so that's part of it, right? But this idea that you can't be attractive and smart at the same time, which is, I wouldn't exist if that was. But no, but like it's stupid, right? It's LA is real. I grew up in South Central. This shit was real. I grew up in 1990s South Central. That's the height of the gang epidemic, the height of the crack epidemic. It was real. It was very real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, they make movies about how real that place was. Like, well, how do y'all sit here?
Yeah. It's but they don't think of that as LA, right? They think of that as like, as I don't know. They think of that as like, oh, that's Compton, South Central. That's something.
South Central is its own thing, but South Central is LA. Hollywood is not, right? Like, I don't know how to help you with that.
Los Angeles, yeah.
It's yeah. Well, what do I digress.
My life begins in East Los Angeles, also Los Angeles, right? So like, also.
Or who was it? Was it the playwright Luis Alfaro who said this? I think he said, I think it was him who said, growing up, because Luis Alfaro grew up in East LA, right?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And I think he said in one of his plays, Hollywood, though feels like a 30-minute, Hollywood, though a 30-minute bus ride feels like a million miles away for us.
Yeah, of course.
And I try to explain to people, huh?
I don't know if he said, but that's definitely true. I mean,
yeah. And I try to explain to people the first time I went to Hollywood was when I was 17.
Yeah.
That was the first time. I was like 16 or 17, something like that. Go for what? What am I going there for? So yeah, even though it's quick, it can feel like a whole other country. And also, I could go on and on about this notion of fake people. It's like, people are performers. Everybody's.
Yeah.
You think everybody from New York are like, or pick a city that you think is real. We could break that down about how fake and silly that is too. Like, New York has Times Square. You know who built that up and put money in Disney? What do you got? How real is that? Like, I'm lost. I'm just like, yeah, I got to do better with y'all critiques.
All right. Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned Luis Alfaro. I'm actually interviewing him, I think tomorrow.
Oh, dope.
But you know what's interesting has been a consistent theme with a lot of people I bring, especially people who've made it through academy, particularly those who come from my community. Well, I mean, that's really the only people I've been asking so far. But in terms of this next question, I'm gonna I gotta adjust a little bit. But like, you know, I come from a community where our intelligence is constantly questioned in this country, right? Or it's constantly battered down. And I imagine it's probably similar experience. So these people I asked Nolan Cabrera, I've asked a few other people, like, well, when was the first time you got punished for being a smart Mexican, right? Which is like essentially when was the first time that you showed intelligence? You're not supposed to have intelligence, and now I'm gonna somehow, you know, fuck with you because of it. So when was that first time that you experienced that?
Yeah, so I've never been punished for being a smart Mexican. But I don't know, man. Like, I think I have a counter experience. I'm sure I've been punished for being smart, but it's not been by my own community. Mm-hmm. This notion that Black and brown communities don't like smart people, I think is a bit.
Oh, it was meant by white people. Like when
right. Oh yeah. But I'm critiquing that first, right? Because I do think there's these floating ideas that poor Black and brown communities don't. We're gonna punish the smart person. You like school too much. Be dumb or gangs. And I was like, that's not how that worked. And it's not how that worked for me. I think I was really celebrated by Black people for being quote unquote smart, right? It's actually how I learned that I was smart, right? Like everybody told me I was smart, so I believed it. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, okay, I agree with y'all. And that was good for me, right? That was good for me. And I think it provided a buffer in terms of like my experiences with white people. I think I've always threatened. So like in high school speech and debate, one of the reasons I was such an a-hole to go all the way back there was because I would encounter white students who would tell me, oh, he can't even speak well, so how is he gonna win? And I'd just say shit like that. And I'm like, oh, okay, we'll see. That's fine. And sort of threaten them in that way. I'm just trying to think. I don't know. I'm certain it's happened. I'm certain it was a college experience when I challenged a professor of some sort that could not imagine here's this young Black kid from South Central telling him he doesn't know what he's talking about, and I didn't even do it disrespectfully. I disagreed with people, right? Like I disagree.
Yeah.
Like I just emphatically disagree. And that's happened throughout my collegiate career. So I can't really, I'm trying to think of the first time, and I can't pinpoint first times. I can pinpoint memorable times, right? Like when I was in grad school and we were reading, one of my professors who, Chinese, said, like, I don't know how we were talking pop culture, and he said something to the tune of, I would never let my son date a Black woman unless she looked like Aaliyah. I was like, well, fuck you. That's literally what I said in class. I was like, well, fuck you. And he was like, what? But beyond that, like that's me setting the tone for him having some racial issues. But he used to say very interesting things that tried to challenge me in the class in a way that he did not any of my other counterparts, as I was the only Black person in there. Yeah, like I don't know, straight up pun it. Like it's hard to remember like that. I can't remember the first moment.
Yeah.
And maybe that's me doing mental work to say it's not important to remember that moment. I don't know. For me.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, you know, at the time I've known you, you've always pushed right through people's bullshit. So I mean, like that's, you know.
Yeah, it's been, I think, one of my best assets to be like, okay, whatever.
right. So you're Northwestern. You get your doctorate. You produced this book. I remember when it was coming out. I remember how big a deal it was to the poetry community. Can you tell us a little about Killing Poetry and why? Tell us what it is, because I got certain questions about it. But tell us what it is first. That's the content.
Yeah. So like the big thing about it is it's a multi-sided ethnographic project that look at slam and spoken word poetry communities in Los Angeles, then the national scene, then the internet scene, and then I go back to Chicago's scene to ask what can they teach us about poetry and how communities might be able to function, right, in better ways. And it follows that trajectory because that was my trajectory in slam and spoken word. First LA, then the national scene, then the internet scene, right? And then I also worked with youth poets in Chicago for a brief moment. And I say all of that to say that, because it's an ethnographic project, and I learned from Dee Soini Madison, who writes the book Critical Ethnography, and when she teaches us that it's incredibly important to, mark our positionalities, which is not just to name our identities, but how do our positions, how do our identities in relationship to the people that we're interviewing with, alter the very narrative in which we're sort of scripting in research, right? So it's a practice that rejects sort of this positivist notion of objectivity that says we are subjective beings, that, it wants to move away from this sort of ethnographic move that says, look, or so a lot of early ethnography, if I backtrack to say it easier, a lot of early ethnography was about, white men going to witness the dark-bodied other in their natural habitat from a distant and detached observer position to get the objective truth. But we know, to cite Lanita Jacobs' paper out of grad school, now a associate professor at USC, when she writes the natives are gazing and talking back, people know when they're being watched. And so they give you a thing, right? Or as Randall Hurston quipped in Of Mules and Men, white folks come around, we give them something to play with so we can go about our day. So what we're learning is that distant, detached observer position doesn't always function as well as you think it does, right? Because people aren't stupid, and they know when they're being surveilled, and they act a certain way when they're being surveilled. And so what my sort of practice of ethnography does is it says, what happens if I get in there with the people and say, hey, by the way, I'm interviewing you, and I want to co-perform in this community while you co-perform. And it's going to be messy and it's going to be confusing. But if we lay out our biases, we can at least tend to those biases, as opposed to acting as if they do not exist. Yes. Wrestle with them. And so part of the book has to wrestle with some things. I have to wrestle with the fact that I'm not liked by a lot of some of the people in our community, and that's okay. That happens, right? I don't think no one's liked by everyone in any one community, but how does that shape the narrative? I had missed out on some important interviews with some important stakeholders in the community because they don't want to talk to me. And quite frankly, I don't want to talk to them. And so that stuff shapes things, you know what I mean? And so that's what the project does. And one of the things that I sort of argue is, when I wrote it, most of the discourse around slam and spoken word was, these are completely radical, aproblematic communities. And I'm like, no, there's a lot of race stuff going on here. There's a lot of sexism. There's some homophobia, some transphobia stuff going on here. There's definitely some class issues that are at play, that we're replicating the very structures that we originally tried to push back against, right? And in so doing, I lay that out not to be messy, but what I was trying to do is say the value of slam and spoken word communities, in my humble opinion, is not in our abilities to speak back to power, but rather in our abilities to imagine altogether different power structures. Hence the notion of killing poetry. The idea here is that Harold Bloom, it starts off by discussing noted critic Harold Bloom, who said slams, in a Paris interview of 2000 or 2001, Paris Review, he says, they were asking a who's who of critics, who were their favorite poets. And he says something to the tune of, he named, and they all named, every white man you could think of who writes poems. And eventually they were like, well, what makes a good poet? And they started talking about, this makes a great poet, that makes a great poet, this quality, yada, yada, yada. And out of nowhere, no one asks. You know that meme when it's like nobody, and then all of a sudden, it's like nobody, and then that's what it was. Nobody was asking Harold Bloom anything about slam. And he just went on and he literally said, and of course, it's all going to shit now. He was like, with these accounts of people ranting in bars. He goes, I've never seen it, but it's terrible, kind of thing. And it's like, that's weird to say something you've never seen is awful. I think that's stupid. But that's what he does, right? It's precisely what he did. And in doing that, he effectively said it's going to be the death of art, is what he calls it. So
Wow.
I make the argument that in Harold Bloom's imagination, art is a white, by and large, male, heteronormative, engagement. And if so, if slam represents the death of that, then kill it. So be it. Make room for something else.
Yeah.
I don't really care to save white male ego. It's just not high on my radar to work on. It's just like, oh, well, right? And so that's the notion of killing poetry. And I wanted to think about that as a model for how else that we've rejected those how else we've built around those spaces and people that rejected us. So when early slam and spoken word poets couldn't get published, we built publishing houses. Yeah. When we couldn't get into creative writing programs, we created workshops and taught each other how to write poems. Like we literally built schools, right? Like not physical schools, though some of us actually have physical things. Well, no, let me not say it because I would count Urban Word, I would count Philly Youth Project. I could count those as schools, right? And other programs like that exist around the country. Des Moines has DSM and so forth and so on, right? Young Chicago authors who go into schools, but do a thing unto themselves. And so I love the way in which we were creative enough to say, you don't want me, let me build something that's better. And I think that was where our power lied. I'm fearful that in this moment, that so many of us are getting access to the very academy that never wanted us in the first place. As poets, so many of us are getting grants. All of that's fine, right? Like in terms of how the world functions in a capitalist mode. Like if that's how you're gonna do it, what I am pushing back against is I don't want us to settle for their approval. I loved our radicality in building something other than them.
Yeah.
For me, that was the most radical potential we held.
Yeah. Yeah, creating a different set of standards, a different frame of reference, a different cosmology and shit.
Yeah, instead of being like, I got the grant now, I'm one of them, screw all of you all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or not always screw all of you all, but I'm one of them. Let me show you how you can also become one of them.
Well, I mean, even the idea that they legitimize you, right? So I remember watching this documentary, I think, on Nas, and it was just showing you like how he made his music, how he started this, that. But it ends with him getting this award from Harvard, right? But who gives a fuck? Like you're Nas, who gives a fuck about Harvard? Like why is that to show like, yeah, and Nas was truly great. Here he is getting an award at Harvard.
See,
fuck that, you know what I mean?
It reifies the fact that in order to be considered great, a great institution has to tell you so, right?
You know how many people are attending Harvard right now?
Huh?
You know how many people are attending Harvard right now? A couple thousand of people are attending Harvard right now, and none of them are Nas. So I mean, like, who gives a fuck?
No, I know. I'm just saying. I agree with you. It reifies that, and despite the fact that the hood has told him he was great for the longest.
Yeah. Right. I mean, but it's the filmmaker that's doing it. It's not him. It's the filmmaker saying, like, this is how I choose to end this film. Here he is at Harvard. See, he was great.
Right.
Yeah. He had a Hennessy commercial, and then give me the fuck a speech to Harvard. Give me a Hennessy commercial. Like.
But yeah, I mean, there's a way in which, and I'm not saying, because Nas he's a part of that hip hop thing that they have. I'm forgetting the name of it. Desan out of North Carolina?
Yeah.
He was one of the fellows in the program. I know some other people too, but I kind of use him as a frame of reference that I think you'd know. I forget, but there is a fellowship for hip hop studies at Harvard under Nas too. So, I mean, people love their own institutionalization and their own legacy. I wonder if it has something to do with our fear of death and what happens when we die, and I want to stick around and
yeah,
just go to the next process, man.
Yeah. Well, I was having fun shitting on big academies, but then like you made it all existential. So
that's what happened. And I was like, just go ahead, man. Like, let go. Yeah. I don't know. I love Buddy Wakefield's line in one of his poems when he was like, cemeteries are just the human. I don't fully agree with it, but I actually love it when he says cemeteries are just humans' way of not letting go. Let go, y'all. Just let go. Like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
So Killing Poetry, what was interesting to me about it was that, there's, or what at the time, I remember when you were doing it and announcing they were doing it and the process of it happening and everyone knew it was on the horizon, was, there's so much of this tension between, like, I don't know, this is a cliche way of describing it, there's better ways, but it's kind of idea of this distinction between like the page poets and the stage poets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was a way of like really saying, like, this is like legitimate in the fact that it's not like it's legitimate because the university is, but it's legitimate that it can be studied, it can be broken down. These are techniques that are chosen by people. You can diagram these sentences, you can break apart these lines, you can understand why they line break this way. It is worthy of study. It's not even as worthy of study, but should you choose to study this, it will take you a long time, just as with anything. You know what I mean? Like there are schools out here, and that's obviously true, and it had been true long before you did it. But it was such a bold declaration of the fact that was true. It was such a shining example that it was true. It was such a you were making it undeniable that it was true. You were shining light on truth. That's a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean that's what I try to do. I try to do a little bit of truth telling, at least from my vantage point, and hopefully, what I honestly hope for out of the book is that someday somebody will pick it up and go, "He got it all wrong. Here's what else we need to know." I think of my scholarship. I've never tried to be, in terms of an academic, the smartest person in the room or the woke. I don't give a shit about that. Like I'm curious. I'm curious, and that's what drives my intellect. I'm fascinated by things, and I can't help that fascination, right? Like what's actually happening there. And I say all of that to say, because of that, I treat my scholarship like conversation. It is not perfect. No one's written a perfect piece of scholarship, even the scholarship we absolutely love, yeah. Right? But it's to say that I treat it like a conversation, and I hope that people, who want to study slam and spoken word communities in the future, pick it up and argue with it, get angry at it, love it, hate it, write about it, tear it apart, build it up, hold it up, whatever the heck you have to do to enter into the conversation. By all means, enter into the conversation.
Yeah. That's what seminal works do. All right. So Chirac.
Yeah.
Tell us about.
Yeah, so that came about. Harvey Young, he was one of my professors at Northwestern, but now the dean at Boston College, I think, yeah. Along with Jana Moser, who was the editor at Northwestern U Press, who's now at Vassar, I think, U Press. I think Vassar. No, Vanderbilt. She's at Vanderbilt U Press. And they sort of came to me because they were thinking about my original project, or somebody put Jana in contact with me about Killing Poetry. And I go, well, was supposed to be with another editor, but I've signed with a press. I'm good. That book has a home, but keep me in mind for the future. And Jana said, okay. Then she came back to me with Harvey, because Harvey has a series with Northwestern called Second to None. Chicago's called the Second City, so there's series about Chicago being called Second to None, right? And in that, they wanted to look at Chicago communities in various kinds of ways, to try to get an understanding about Chicago in different ways, right? And so they approached me to write about slam communities in Chicago, but I didn't want to do that. Instead, I was like, why don't I get the youth to write about it, right? And they were like, that's fascinating. Say more, right? And I was like, so many of us talk about Chicago. How many of us are talking with Chicago? I would like to speak with Chicago. Call me crazy here, right? And I wanted to think through Chirac as a vexed and complex term, one that is troubling for the city, that for the people who live in certain parts of Chicago, but also one that's generative for certain people who live in Chicago, right? And I wanted the youth who actually are from Chicago to talk about Chicago, Chirac, where the two terms meet, their city, what they think it should be like, what it has been. And I wanted them to speak, because so often we speak about the youth. Very rarely do we actually speak with them, and they are smart. Like, look, I love the song, I Believe the Children of the Future. Beautiful song. I can listen to that as soon as we get off of this. But the children are also present right now. And they have a voice right now. Amazing when we listen to them and they tell us things. It's like, oh my gosh, right? And so the idea was to call it a literary mixtape because Northwestern U Press would be this soundtrack, right? The popular soundtrack, right? Just like a mixtape would have a popular soundtrack featuring underground artists, right? And it's in so saying that I'm like, all right, we have that. Press is the popular soundtrack. The young folks who rarely get spoken, who rarely gets talked with, but always talked about, talked at, are the underground artists who needs to be featured on this. And so the idea was to allow them to theorize about their own space.
Yeah. That's fantastic. What projects do you have coming up?
So I'm working on a few things. I am working on, well, let me step back. So the first thing, because I'm already forgetting it because it's done, right? So the thing that's coming out soon is the October 13th, 2020. My first book of poems, third book called Ain't Never Not Been Black.
Who's publishing it?
Button Poetry is publishing it. I'm excited about that. The cover's fantastic. It's already available for pre-order. You can put my name in Amazon, Javon Johnson, Javon Johnson. Pop that pre-order, get it cracking. Hopefully somebody will watch one of these 100 years from now and be like, oh my God, let me go look for this book. Hilarious. So
let it go, Javon. Let it go.
Let go, right? Like let go. It's nothing serious, bro. But it'll be that. Is that then I'm working on a book project with Rudy, a book of poems that speaks a lot about our brotherhood, about our friendship, about who it is that we are to each other, and how that relationality might speak to a larger sort of, thing about Black men, particularly straight Black men, right? And then I'm just working, at the urge of Shihan, or thanks to the urging of Shihan, been sort of writing stuff and projects with him and outside of him, in hopes of writing for TV and film soon.
Exciting things on the horizon. Yeah.
I'm also thinking about my next academic manuscript, and I'm not sure where I'm going to go. I have so many ideas. One's on Black joy as a theory and method. Another is probably right about the WNBA. So I'm not sure. I'm all over the place here.
Yeah. So we had a question in the comment section. We have some statements, people interested in your work. We'll drop the links below as we do. But the question was, how was your effect as a slam poet? How has it affected? I can't see all the questions because I remember it. How has your work as a slam poet affected your work as an academic? Like, how did it inform it?
Yeah, so I came out of Northwestern's Performance Studies program, and one of the people who was most essential for building up that program and giving it a name was a man by the name of Dwight Conkergood, who passed the year before I got there, right? And Dwight coined what he called the 3 A's, which is artistry, activism, and academia. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he argued is that there's no difference between the three, right? That a good artist who's an activist and academic, that they should all inform one another, right? That my art informs my activism, informs my academia informs me, the other two, and they're in this sort of cyclical nature. So I say all of that to say, even my academic work, I try to write it in a way that it's pleasurable to read, right? Like there's some books that I absolutely think are brilliant, but I think they are just dry reads. And I'm like, oh my God, how do we, ugh. Like years ago, man, I read a book on Black comedians, and it wasn't funny, and I was just lost. Like, how the hell you do this? why would you make this a choice? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I try to write in a way that reads well, right? Yeah. Because I think that matters. So my book was intentionally short because, you know, it's hard to get people to read 50 pages of a book, let alone 250. And academics love to produce a 250 plus page book. And
but they read a lot. They say the same thing over and over and over again in like different chapters. I mean, like, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry.
We do. But we do, right? Because there's a formula as to how to write a book.
Yeah.
Right? An academic book, right? And so I don't, you know, a part of me follows those formulas, but a part of me just completely diverge and go in other directions, right? Like out of nowhere, I might just feel like writing a poem. You know what I mean? Like the thing is people ask, how do they inform? And I think the easiest way for me to say it is, A, the Dwight Conker good answer, but also B, I am all the same thing, right? Like I don't think about my academic hat and then my artist hat. I'm an activist, artist, academic.
Yeah.
And they're all the same thing, right? Like I try to teach in my poems. I try to write creatively in my academic work. I have political bents in everything I do. It's clear where my political frustrations are and my concerns are. Yeah, and when I go and work in communities, it's usually around art and education.
Yeah.
So it's for me, it's all the same.
So I've taken up about a little over an hour of your time, and I really, really, really appreciate you joining.
No doubt.
But I want to ask, we're gonna drop links to your work. We're gonna the work you've already done and completed, so we can buy and read right now in this time. But before you go, I do want to ask you a question. Kind of try to tailor to the guest as best I can. But the question I'm interested in asking you is you know, for those who are like people who've made it made some kind of name for themselves, a poet or a comedian or whatever it is, as an artist of some sort, and they want to get known for what they think about the world, you know, to have this idea of being an intellectual, public intellectual, if you will. What advice would you have for them to make that kind of transition? Not losing their artistry, but also you know, kind of move into like, well, here's what I think. Here's what, you know, what advice would you have to give them?
Yeah, my one thing, and I actually tell this to a lot of people. So you said who want to be known, or just for a thing?
Who want to be known as for what they think. And
I think too many people create art for the world that currently exists, and not enough art for the world they want to exist. Right? I try to create art for the world that I want to exist. And that's the best way I could say it, right? Meaning you create art for the world that you want to exist, and you create new audiences, and those new audiences establish worlds. Performance and creativity matters. They create things, right? They spark real material change over time, right? Not to say that, you know, to go back to Soini's claim, I'm not saying one performance will change the world, and I'm paraphrasing her here. I am saying a performance or a piece of art can, you know, snowball and cause an avalanche of material change over the long haul, right? And we've seen that happen, right? We've seen the importance of art to the Harlem Renaissance, also known as the New Negro Movement. And how that helped to establish the idea that Black people are indeed human too. We can go into a philosophical critique about humanists and how the modern project of humanists wrapped in the whiteness in Europe. But I'm pretty sure you're aware of it. But the point is that art functioned, right? We could talk about how important art was to the queer LGBTQ plus movement, to feminist movements, to civil rights, to Black power movements. Art has, you know, it does a thing. And I think those artists have often tried to create art for a world they want to exist. And it's in that it allows us to imagine and work towards that new world, those new possibilities, new relationalities. So for me, I desperately want artists to think about not what currently exists, but also about what they want to exist, right? Artists are, I think, incredibly important. you know, and why else would Plato have had them killed off in his perfect republic? They're dangerous. They allow us to think beyond the structures that exist. Imagination is wildly powerful. A thing doesn't exist, your imagination says, poof, it does. And then it allows you to, that's a wild thing. Like, no one's ever thought of this. I did. And then you make it happen. That's a really wild concept. And then work towards that. But there's the reason that poets had to be murdered off in the Perfect Republic because, you know, they're silver slick tongues. They can have you believe things that the philosopher kings don't want you to believe. And so for me, it's important to think outside. And I think that's where creatives come into being. Is their constant desire, or come into play, is their constant desire to think outside, to expand, to ask, okay, but what's next? What else could be? Yeah.
Beautiful. I mean, what can I say? Thank you so much for having joined us.
Thank you.
We were joined by Dr. Javon Johnson, and this was a DAW signature series. For our speaker series, the DAW Center for the Arts is a not-for-profit in Pomona, California, serving the area of Pomona and surrounding areas, and on the internet now, so the world.
Word.
Thank you so much.
All right, bro. Peace. Be safe out here.